Hi, I'm Lizzie Bishop, and welcome back to Ready for Horror Night. On this channel, I share unsettling real-life stories that will send chills down your spine. Tonight, I'll tell you about one of the eeriest Uber rides ever experienced, when an ordinary night turned into pure terror. Mark had never planned to become an Uber driver. In fact, only a few months earlier, he had been working at a small retail shop downtown, a place where he knew every customer by face, if not by name. But when the pandemic swept through in 2020, that job disappeared overnight. Bills, however, did not. Rent, groceries, the endless costs of simply surviving. They still came knocking, louder than ever. So Mark turned to what seemed like the quickest fix: late-night rideshare driving. At first, it felt almost ordinary, almost safe. The empty roads gave him a strange kind of peace, as if the city had gone to sleep and left its secrets for him alone. But the peace never lasted long. Nights were unpredictable. Some passengers stumbled into his back seat drunk and loud. Others whispered their sorrows into the dark, and a few just sat in silence, their eyes heavy with unspoken stories. Mark thought he had seen it all in those endless nights behind the wheel, until one October evening proved him wrong. It was just past midnight, the hour when most of the world turns inward, when even the streetlights seemed tired. Mark had just dropped a customer off at a chain hotel on the city's edge. He thought about heading home, maybe grabbing a late meal. Then his phone chimed. A new request. He accepted without thinking. 6 minutes away, the screen said. Easy money. The pin landed in front of a shuttered bowling alley, part of an aging strip mall that hadn't seen much life in years, the kind of place where shadows gathered and lingered. As Mark pulled in, the lot was deserted except for a single figure standing beneath a buzzing lamp. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, his shoulders draped in a gray hoodie that hung loose like a curtain. His head was bent, chin nearly touching his chest, as though the weight of the night pressed down on him. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, motionless. Mark rolled to a stop, lowering the window just enough. "Are you Derek?" he asked, repeating the name on his screen. The man looked up slowly. His face was pale under the dim light, his expression flat, empty. After a long pause, he nodded once, then walked toward the car without a word. Something about him, too calm, too detached, sent a prickle across the back of Mark's neck. But the man slid into the back seat, pulling the door shut with a soft click, and the silence inside the car seemed to grow heavier than the night outside. Mark told himself it was just another ride, but deep down he already knew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The silence in the car pressed in on Mark like a second skin. The man in the gray hoodie leaned back, eyes fixed not on the bend window, not on his phone, but directly ahead, straight at the back of Mark's head. It was the kind of gaze you could feel, like cold fingers brushing the nape of your neck. Mark tried to shake it off. He cleared his throat, forced a casual tone, and asked if the destination in the app was correct. The screen glowed with an address 20 minutes away, tucked in a part of town Mark had never visited. "Yeah," the passenger said at last. His voice was low, steady, drained of any color or warmth. It wasn't slurred like a drunk, nor jittery like someone high. It was flat, as if the words were just shadows slipping from his mouth without meaning. Mark gave a quick nod, as though that single syllable had reassured him. It hadn't. He pulled the car out of the strip mall and onto the road, the tires humming against the cracked asphalt. For 5 long minutes, not another sound was exchanged. The only rhythm was the engine, and the only movement was the faint sway of streetlights passing overhead. Every now and then Mark risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Every time he found the man exactly the same, hands buried in his hoodie, eyes locked on him, unblinking. It was like driving with a statue in the back seat, a statue carved with intent, with patience. Mark tried again, his voice thinner this time. "How's your night going?" There was a pause. So long he thought the man wouldn't answer at all. Then slowly the words came. "Just needed to get out of there." "Out of where?" Mark asked, a faint attempt at small talk. The man's gaze didn't waver. His reply was soft, final. "Doesn't matter." A chill slid down Mark's spine. He didn't ask again. The car carried them deeper into the sleeping city. Fewer lights, fewer houses. The streets stretched out like veins into darker places. With every mile, the night grew heavier, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just driving someone home. He was driving toward something else entirely, something waiting, silent and unseen, at the end of that pin on his screen. And deep in his gut, Mark already knew. This wasn't an ordinary passenger. The road stretched on like a ribbon of shadow, leading them farther from the city's pulse. With every mile, the streetlights thinned, until only patches of pale glow interrupted the darkness. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, listening to the drone of the engine, waiting for his passenger to say something, anything, that would make this feel like a normal ride. But the silence lingered, heavy and unnatural. It wasn't the quiet of a tired rider dozing off, nor the quiet of someone scrolling absently through their phone. This was a silence alive with pressure, as if the man in the back seat carried a storm inside him and refused to let it break. Mark's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved an inch. His gaze remained fixed, not at the window, not at the road. Ahead, just at the back of Mark's head, unwavering, unblinking. The stare clung to him like a shadow that refused to be shaken. Trying to ease the tension clawing at his chest, Mark forced out a casual laugh. "Rough night, huh?" There was a long pause, so long the words seemed to dissolve into the hum of the car. Then the man finally answered, his voice a low murmur. "You could say that." Mark tried again, softer this time. "Everything all right?" Another pause. The man leaned slightly forward, his presence pressing into the air between them. His answer was colder now, stripped of anything human. "Not yet." The words hung in the car like frost on glass. Mark's throat tightened. He didn't dare ask what that meant. His instincts screamed to end the ride, to pull over, to get out. But his hand stayed on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the dark road. Outside, the city was gone. No more neon signs, no more traffic, only the endless stretch of trees and blackened fields. The farther they drove, the more it felt less like a destination and more like a descent, one road leading into a place where ordinary nights went to die. And still, the man sat silent, watching. The GPS's soft voice cut through the suffocating silence. "Turn right in 400 feet." Mark glanced at the glowing screen, his stomach tightening. The map's blue line dragged him farther from the comfort of lit streets and into a labyrinth of shadows where houses sat farther apart, swallowed by trees and the kind of quiet that didn't belong to the living. The man in the gray hoodie hadn't moved. He sat still, eyes locked forward, as if he already knew where the road would end. Mark turned, gravel crunching beneath his tires. The houses here were nothing like the neat suburban rows he was used to. These were relics, old wood siding peeling, porches sagging, windows blind with years of neglect. Each yard was a graveyard of weeds, chain-link fences rusted and bent. The deeper he drove, the more it felt like he had crossed some invisible threshold, leaving the city behind for a place that had long been forgotten. Your stop should be coming up, Mark said, forcing his voice to sound even. Number 421. He squinted through the windshield, searching for house numbers in the darkness. That's when the man leaned forward, his breath cool against the back of Mark's ear. Pull into that driveway, he whispered. Mark's eyes followed the man's finger to the right. There it was, a house that looked more like a corpse than a home. The porch sagged forward as though ready to collapse, paint flaking away like shedding skin. The lawn was a wild snarl of weeds and tall grass, glistening with dew under the faint starlight. Not a single light burned inside. Mark slowed, his throat tightened. Is this your place? He asked, the words breaking the silence like fragile glass. The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the blackened windows, his face unreadable. Then, without shifting his gaze, he muttered, "Just pull in." A voice deep inside Mark screamed, "Don't." Every instinct told him this was wrong, every nerve ending alive with warning. But his hands moved on their own, turning the wheel, guiding the car into the overgrown driveway. Gravel popped under the tires as if the earth itself resisted his entry. He parked near the front steps. The house loomed above him, its dark frame silhouetted against the pale moon, its windows like empty sockets staring down. He shifted into park but kept the engine running, a quiet prayer humming from the machine. The man didn't move right away. He sat there, shoulders hunched, staring at the front door with an intensity that made Mark's skin crawl. "Everything all right?" Mark asked, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. The man finally stirred. Without looking at him, he said 2 words, "Wait here." Then he opened the door and stepped out. The air that rushed in was damp and cold, carrying the smell of wet leaves and mildew. Mark watched him walk toward the house, but instead of climbing the porch steps, the man drifted along the side, his figure dissolving into the darkness until he was gone completely. Mark sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, the engine purring like a nervous animal beneath him. Minutes ticked by, 1, 2. The longer he sat, the louder his heartbeat thundered in his ears. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man reappear behind him, inside the car where he no longer belonged. His phone screen glowed faintly on the dashboard. The trip was still active. A part of him wanted to end it, to drive away and leave this house, this passenger, this nightmare behind. But another part whispered warnings. What if he came back while the car was moving? What if leaving made things worse? Mark licked his lips, fingers trembling, and finally tapped the screen to end the ride. The notification chimed, sharp in the heavy silence. He shifted into reverse, ready to back out of the driveway. That's when he saw movement. The man was returning fast. His stride was longer now, his head no longer bowed. His hands swung freely, empty, but his face, Mark caught a glimpse of it under the moonlight, was twisted with something he couldn't name. Anger, excitement, hunger. Mark's pulse spiked. For a heartbeat, he considered locking the doors, speeding away. But his body betrayed him. Instead, his hand reached for the unlock button, almost as if obeying some unspoken order. The locks clicked open. The man yanked the back door wide and slid in with a quickness that felt predatory. The smell of damp air clung to him, sharp and earthy. He leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the cabin. "Take me to the other place," he said, his voice no longer flat but edged, trembling with something like urgency. Mark swallowed hard. What? What other place? "Just drive, I'll tell you." Mark's knuckles whitened on the wheel. His voice cracked as he answered. "You need to put it in the app. That's That's how it works." The man didn't respond. He simply stared at Mark through the mirror, eyes dark, unblinking. The seconds dragged on like hours. Finally, with a slow, deliberate tone, the man said, "Then take me back, where you picked me up." The words shouldn't have been a relief, but they were. Mark nodded quickly and shifted into drive, pulling away from the abandoned house. The gravel gave way to cracked pavement, and then the road stretched forward again into the black night. But the silence that filled the car now was heavier, darker, as though the house itself had followed them, riding along in the back seat. The road back from the abandoned house felt longer than the drive there, as if the night itself had stretched to trap them inside. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel, sweat slicking his palms despite the chill that seeped into the car. His passenger sat motionless in the back seat, but his presence filled every corner, pressing against the glass, smothering the air. Mark tried to focus on the white lines glowing faintly beneath his headlights. Each one slipped under the tires and disappeared, but none of them seemed to carry him closer to safety. The man hadn't spoken since demanding to be taken back. He simply sat there, silent, but Mark could feel his gaze burning through the mirror. Something primal stirred in Mark's gut, a warning, a voice without words telling him that this wasn't just another strange ride, that the man behind him was something else entirely. He didn't know if it was danger, madness, or something worse, but his instincts screamed that staying in this car with him was a mistake. At the next intersection, Mark slowed. The traffic light above blinked yellow, casting the road in a sickly glow. His foot hovered over the brake pedal, then the accelerator, torn between two choices: obey, keep driving, pretend this was just another passenger, or listen to the icy whisper inside him urging him to end it now, to get out, to run. "Why are you slowing down?" The voice came from the back, calm, but sharper this time, like a blade grazing skin. Mark's throat tightened. Just making sure I'm on the right route," he lied. "You are," the man said. His tone was flat again, but heavier, weighted with something Mark couldn't name. Then came the sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. The man was breathing faster. Mark's heart pounded. He thought of ending the ride completely, pulling over at the nearest gas station, leaving the man there, calling the police. But what would he say? "My passenger makes me uncomfortable. He stares too much. He picked an abandoned house and came back different." No one would take him seriously. And worse, what if trying to escape provoked him? The voice inside. His head grew louder, clawing now. "You're not safe. He's not just another fare. This is not a ride, it's a trap." Mark glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge hovered just above a quarter tank. His phone mounted on the dash glowed faintly with the app still running, a small lifeline to a world beyond the suffocating cabin. He could end the trip. He could slam the pedal and not look back. But every option felt like choosing the wrong door in a house where every hallway was cursed. From the back seat came a sudden laugh, short, sharp, and hollow. It made the hair on Mark's arms rise. "You're nervous," the man said softly. Mark swallowed, forcing a tight smile at the empty road. "It's late. Just tired, that's all." Silence again. But this silence was worse. It was thick with something unsaid, as though the man had tested him with those words and found his answer wanting. They were close now. Mark recognized the stretch of cracked pavement that led back toward the strip mall. Relief should have washed over him, but it didn't. Instead, dread bloomed deeper, because he realized something. If this man wanted to harm him, he wouldn't wait until they returned to a place with lights. He would do it here, on this lonely road, where the trees swallowed sound and the darkness was absolute. Mark's knuckles whitened on the wheel. He could hear his pulse in his ears. The car felt smaller with every breath, the cabin shrinking, the air growing colder. Then, as if sensing the storm inside Mark, the man leaned forward. His face appeared briefly in the mirror, pale and hollow, eyes black as tar. His lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "You're wondering," he whispered. "Wondering what I'm going to do." Mark's stomach dropped. For a second he considered slamming the brakes, throwing the door open and bolting into the night. Anything was better than being trapped in that car. But fear rooted him to the seat, fear and the faint hope that if he just kept driving, if he just reached the strip mall, this nightmare would dissolve back into the ordinary. He inhaled sharply, made his choice, and pressed down on the gas. The car surged forward, carrying them both toward the dim glow ahead. But the feeling in Mark's chest remained, a cold certainty that he had just chosen between two evils, and that whichever road he had picked, the night would not let him go easily. The strip mall came back into view like a ghost resurfacing from the dark. Its familiar shape should have been a relief, but under the pale glow of the parking lot lamps, it looked more desolate than ever. The bowling alley loomed, shut tight, windows dark, the single flickering bulb above the entrance buzzing against the silence. Mark pulled into the same spot where it all began, the gravel crunching under his tires, the air thick with the memory of that first encounter. He eased the car into park, his chest rising and falling in, quick, shallow breaths. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't absence now. It was pressure, heavy, suffocating. Mark dared a glance into the rearview mirror, and that was when the passenger leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate, cutting the stillness in half. "You ever wonder how you're going to die?" The word struck Mark like ice water poured down his spine. He tried to laugh, a brittle sound that cracked in his throat. Not really something I think about," he managed. The man didn't laugh. His face in the mirror was stone, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I think about it all the time." Then he leaned back into the shadows, and for a heartbeat Mark thought it was over, that he'd get out, walk away, vanish into the night. But instead, the man sat still, one hand resting on the door handle, the other hidden in the folds of his hoodie. He lingered, half in, half out of the car, suspended in some unspoken decision. Mark's pulse hammered. Every instinct told him to floor the gas, to flee, to leave this nightmare behind. But he stayed frozen, gripped by the eerie stillness of the man beside him. The night around them seemed to hold its breath. Then the man turned, his eyes catching the weak glow of the streetlight. His lips parted, and in a voice barely above a whisper he said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a sentence, already decided, already sealed. Mark's breath hitched. The man stepped fully out of the car, the door creaking as he pushed it wide. For a moment he just stood there, the faint light casting his shadow, long across the cracked pavement. He didn't close the door. He didn't walk away. He simply stood still, like a figure carved out of the night itself. Then, finally, with a slow, deliberate movement, he shut the door with a click. The sound echoed in the empty lot, louder than it should have been. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the bowling alley, his figure swallowed by the darkness beyond the broken light. Mark sat frozen, every nerve on fire. His hands shook on the wheel, his throat dry. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stared at the spot where the man had vanished, waiting for him to return, to reappear in the mirror, in the seat behind him, in the car where he no longer belonged. Seconds crawled into minutes. Nothing. Just the hum of the engine and the faint buzz of the dying light overhead. At last, Mark forced himself to shift into drive. The tires rolled forward, and with every yard of distance he put between himself and that strip mall, his chest tightened. The road ahead stretched empty, but his mirrors reflected only darkness, and still he checked them again and again. Because even though the seat behind him was empty, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man hadn't left at all, that he was still there, invisible, but present, riding with him, whispering those words over and over. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." The night followed Mark home like a shadow that refused to let go. Every turn of the wheel, every street light that passed overhead seemed to stretch the distance between him and the strip mall, but not the distance between him and the words. They clung to him, gnawed at him, whispering over and over in the corners of his mind, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." By the time his apartment building came into view, his body felt hollow, his chest tight with dread. He parked beneath the dim glow of the lot's single lamp, but instead of getting out, he sat frozen, staring into the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but the silence behind him was alive, charged, as though the man had left something there, an imprint, a residue. Mark's trembling hand reached for his phone. He opened the Uber app, desperate to prove to himself that this was real, that the ride had happened, that there was evidence of the man's existence. But when the trip history loaded, his breath caught. The name Derek was gone. The profile picture, gone. The record of the ride itself, gone. It was as if the passenger had never existed. He tried again, refreshing the page, searching every menu. Nothing. His chest constricted, panic threatening to spill over. Finally, he tapped the Help button, connecting to support. A cheerful, automated voice filled the line, followed by a tired representative. Mark stammered through his explanation, his words tumbling out too fast, about the strange passenger, the abandoned house, the chilling things he'd said. The representative paused, then replied in a flat, practiced tone. "Sometimes trip data is lost if the ride was canceled partway through or if the app crashes. There's no record of what you're describing." Mark's voice cracked. "No, you don't understand. He was in my car. I dropped him off. I heard him." "I'm sorry, sir," the voice on the other end said, almost impatient now. "There's nothing we can recover." Click. The call ended. The apartment felt colder that night. Mark locked every door, checked every window, pulled the blinds tight. Yet even in the safety of his own space, he couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching him, of breath lingering just over his shoulder. When he finally collapsed into bed, sleep came in fragments, snatches of restless dreams where the man's face hovered in the darkness, pale and unblinking, and always, always, that voice. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." Days passed, but the words didn't fade. If anything, they grew sharper, etched into the fabric of his thoughts. Every time his phone chimed with a new request, Mark hesitated. Every time he pulled into a dark parking lot, his chest tightened, waiting for a tall figure in a gray hoodie to emerge beneath the flickering light. Sometimes he swore he saw him, just a shape at the edge of vision, a shadow too, tall, to belong to anyone else. Once, while driving past that same strip mall weeks later, he thought he glimpsed a figure standing exactly where he had picked the man up, head bowed, hands in pockets. But when he blinked, the space was empty. The words carved their way deeper, not just a memory, but a curse. What had the man meant? That Mark wasn't supposed to survive the night? That someone else, some other driver, was the right one? Or was it all a game a cruel sentence meant only to poison his mind forever. Mark didn't know. He would never know. But every time he slid behind the wheel, every time the app chimed in the dead hours of night, the weight of that voice returned, curling around his throat, tightening until he could barely breathe. And deep down, he understood the truth. The ride hadn't ended. Not really. It was still going, mile after mile, carried not on the road but in his bones. Because when a stranger looks you in the eyes and says you picked the wrong guy up tonight, you never stop wondering if one day, somewhere down another dark road, you'll meet him again. Mark never saw the man again, at least not in the way he had that night, but the memory lingered like a splinter under his skin, festering in silence. He stopped driving for a while, telling himself it was just burnout, just exhaustion. Yet the truth was simpler, darker. He could no longer bear the weight of shadows in his back seat. Even months later, when life had begun to crawl back toward normal, there were nights when he'd wake with a start, convinced someone was standing at the foot of his bed. Sometimes, while running errands after dark, he would catch a figure in a hoodie reflected in a storefront window, gone the moment he turned. Most people say ghosts belong to the dead, but Mark knew better. Some ghosts walk among us, cloaked in flesh, slipping into our cars, whispering words that stain our minds forever. You picked the wrong guy up tonight. That phrase was no longer just a memory. It was a curse, one he carried with him into every empty parking lot, every dimly lit corner where silence pressed too heavy on the chest, and the question still haunts him. Did he escape that night? Or was he simply spared? And that, my friends, is tonight's story. If you felt a chill creeping down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive here on the channel. And if you're ready for more nights like this, make sure you subscribe to Ready for Horror Night so you never face the darkness alone.